Well, hello there, good people. It's the Big Heavy, and I am quite literally just back from the airport. Had a business trip out to Grand Rapids, Michigan, which incidentally is an airport I've never had the chance to explore up until this point. And today I want to talk you through how I pack for a business trip. And yes, in the second half of this video, I'm going to go through my bag. I'm going to show you all my cool stuff. I'm going to link to everything down in the bottom. But to start with, and what I'd encourage you to do as you think through your own travel needs, is think more about your philosophy of how you pack. I'm going to share with you my philosophy. I've used that to pick the gear I have. I travel a fair amount. I used to travel an insane and ridiculous and frankly kind of stupid amount. So, some of the things I've chosen to spend money on, maybe a little excessive, maybe a little goofy. I may have 3 of something where a normal human only needs 1 or 2. But I would suggest, start with that philosophy. And once you get your packing philosophy down, I think that'll do a couple things for you. First of all, it's going to make your travel life, whether for work or for fun, a lot more enjoyable. I see, and you've probably seen people in the airports that are lugging these giant packs or, wheeling 4 different things around and trying to keep track of that and just don't look like they're having a very good time. So part of my philosophy is to optimize for weight and to kind of keep things light and not bring anything more than what I need for a particular trip. And also I think that helps you decide, is something worth buying? As always, just because some big dumb animal, mainly yours truly, who happens to be on the internet, tells you to do something or shows you a gadget that looks cool and that works perfectly for them, doesn't mean it's going to work for you. It doesn't mean it's something that you need to run out and buy to make your life better. So with that out of the way, let's talk about travel philosophy. And again, this is where I would suggest that you start, whether you've been traveling for a decade or more, or maybe you just got a new job where you're going to have to be on the road a couple times a month, a couple times a year, or you might end up as I used to be, which was a couple or potentially even 3 trips in a week, which frankly was a bit excessive and not something that was good for my health or my relationships. But that's probably a topic for another video. And for me, there's 2 cores to my packing philosophy. The first is I only want to bring what I need for the mission at hand. And by that, I mean, if I'm going on a 4-day trip for business, my loadout is going to look a little different than, just got back from a 2-night trip. This is everything I brought with me, both in terms of electronics and work stuff and clothing and all of that. And I'll, again, walk you through this a little bit later. But I will, after every trip, empty my bag. I have a couple or 3 different bags I use to travel. I'll put everything back in a place and I'll kind of walk you through how that looks. And before I go on a trip, I almost do a little bit of a shopping spree through my office, and I pull out just the things I need. I pack up whether it's a cable or a piece of clothing or some form of running gear specific to that trip. And generally my aim is that everything that I have in my bag that I bring along with me is something that I'm going to use, or it's something that has multiple purposes, or it's kind of something that I may not use but has enough of a justification that it's worth putting that weight literally on your back and schlepping it halfway around the world. And I would contrast that with how I used to pack when I first started out. And in the old days, I had one of those big black ballistic nylon Toomey bags that everyone who's a budding IT type of consultant seems to have on the airplane. And a lot of those people look sad and overburdened. And unfortunately, I was one of those folks for a while. But my philosophy then was bring everything you could possibly need on every trip. So, I had this gigantic, heavy, overloaded bag with, sometimes 2 laptops. I'd have a New York State toll pass just on the off chance I'd happen to go through New York. And I'd have a Florida one. And thankfully, some of those states have consolidated their passes now. But, I wouldn't use that on most of my trips. I'd have my passport just in the off chance, I'd be in Peoria and somebody would say, hey, I need you to go on a plane to Sri Lanka. And I don't think that ever happens. The times where I have kind of needed passport information on an ad hoc basis, it's been to get a visa. And generally a scan of your passport works fine, which is something I now keep on my phone. The other element of my travel philosophy is I try and go lightweight where it makes sense. And I do a lot of backpacking. I've done bicycle camping, kind of all these outdoor activities where there's been a focus recently on ultralight gear. And I think you can do that without blowing the bank. You don't necessarily need some titanium fountain pen or something goofy like that. But there are a few places where I think you can cut some weight. And again, it's fewer pounds on your back and fewer things that you're going to have to schlep through the airport. And ultimately a little bit less wear and tear on your body as you're going through travel. And I think that's part of making travel a little bit more pleasant. If you arrive where you are, just that couple or 3% more rested because you weren't carrying 3 gigantic bags through some airport, that's a plus, whether you're on personal travel or you've got a business meeting or something like that coming up. Now, both of those philosophies have been kind of wrapped together with the idea of one bag travel. If you're not familiar with that, it's just like the name implies, it's traveling with one single bag that's got your clothes, that's got your work stuff, versus I think the typical traveler usually will have one of those rolly bags and then a backpack or briefcase of some sort. And I was a rolly bag guy for most of my traveling career. I think a year or two before COVID, I switched over to the one bag philosophy. And it's frankly just, for me, a way nicer way to travel. You've got your hands and arms free. You can use your phone if you need to look something up. You can kind of navigate the airport. It's a little more natural to walk versus having this thing dragging behind you and your arm bent in some weird direction to pull your suitcase along. You've only got one thing to keep track of now when you're navigating through travel and all that stuff. If you're going somewhere, I'm looking at Europe, where you might be riding a few trains, where maybe escalators and elevators are not as prevalent, having something that's attached to your back is way nicer than having something that you're dragging around on wheels. Now, the only big negative to one bag travel, and there's a zillion videos on this that you can check out at your leisure, is you now have something on your back. And I understand people may have back problems that may be a little more physically challenging for some people than dragging something along. But if it's physically feasible for you, I would recommend grab some sort of big backpack that you probably have lying around your house. Next time you've got an overnight trip, try just putting everything in a backpack and see how that goes for you. And if it works, if you like it, if you kind of enjoy that ability to move around a little more freely and only have one thing to worry about, then you can look at all the cool, one bag travel, purpose-built type of bags and stuff like that. So with that out of the way, let me walk you through the stuff that I brought. And again, I'm literally straight off the plane. This is the exact load that I brought with me on a 2-night, 3-ish day business trip. This was from my home in the Southeast up to, I guess, central-ish Michigan. There was snow on the ground, so there was kind of a climate shift involved in this trip. The place I ultimately ended up going for my meetings was not close to any major airport, so I had some rental car driving along the way. So kind of an interesting trip with some different stuff going on. So let me start out with electronics. And before I delve into the bag, this is probably an obvious one, but I've got a smartphone. I think this is a newish iPhone, and probably the one kind of neat thing I have on here that I think is relevant, whether you have an iPhone or Android or whatnot. I have one of those little wallets that goes on the back of your phone. It holds 3 cards. And when I travel for business, I try and strip myself down to driver's license, corporate credit card, and 1 personal credit card. I don't carry any cash generally. That's not a problem in most places in the US and others. I think the only place that used to be a challenge was doing things like tipping valet drivers and things like that, but now most of them will take Venmo. And this little wallet thing I've got, which I'll link to down below as I will with all the other stuff, what's neat about it is it works with Apple's Find My functionality. So if you leave it somewhere, you can locate it, you can make it beep. I'm generally notorious for leaving my wallet somewhere at home and thinking, this is really a smart place to put it. I will obviously remember this, and then about 6 minutes later forgetting where I put it. So that feature is nice for me. And it also has like this little goofy stand thing. So I can sit at a restaurant or sit on an airplane or whatnot, have the thing stand up, and I can go and you kind of read the news or read some emails or something like that. So it's one of those things that serves a few different purposes. It's a wallet, it's a finder of lost payment, and it's this little stand, and I think it has this little finger thing that I don't really use that's a little bit janky. And just like I mentioned how I kind of go shopping within my house for all the things I need in a particular trip, I have my wad of credit cards in a drawer, and I only bring the ones I need. And having this kind of 3-card thing forces me to only bring those with me. And I have another little credit card carrying wallet. So if I am going on a longer trip, if I'm going somewhere for multiple weeks and might need a whole bunch of stuff, I can throw that in a secondary bag. But this guy is always in my pocket. It's always close at hand. It's ready to pull out for security or pop out at a hotel or taxi or whatever, where I might need my corporate card if I'm on a business trip, or whatever card I'm choosing to travel with when I'm on a personal trip. So let's jump into my bag. And I've done a review of this bag separately that I'll link to up above. This happens to be a Black Ember bag. What I really like about this bag is it kind of has this expansion zipper on it, and you can see the review for more details. But typically I'll go somewhere, kind of take my clothes out when I get to the hotel and unpack them, and then zip up this expansion thing. And then it's like a more normal briefcase size. This looks like a little bit of an excessive briefcase, and it looks a little bit goofy when you walk into a client meeting. But I can slim this down, zip that guy up, and I'm good to go. There are backpack straps that then hide away, so I can wear this as a backpack or make it look like a normal briefcase, since sometimes, a little less so these days, but sometimes you look a little dorky coming into a meeting with a backpack on. But check out that video if you want to find out more about this particular bag. So I try and organize my stuff, and this is a pretty logical thing that you can do with any bag that you may have in terms of what I need to access most quickly. So I've got this outside pocket here. Most bags will have some kind of outside pocket, and I've got my little pouch of electronic stuff. And this comes from a company called Orbit Key. I got this white color on sale. I don't love it. I'd probably get black if I had my choice. But in any event, what I like about this pouch is that it'll stand up on its own generally. So if I'm at work, I'm working on my laptop or iPad, and I'll talk about that in a minute, I can stand this thing up. It has this weird little fold down capability where it will kind of open up and let you sort of fold it down. So you got all your cords sitting there in front of you, and it's just big enough to carry kind of my mission critical cords. And it has a companion pouch that's a little bigger. So if I'm going on a long trip and I'm bringing things like extra hard drives, or I might bring an external mouse or something like that, I can have this with sort of the core stuff I need and then tuck that into that bigger pouch. In terms of the stuff I need, and again, each and every trip I'll unload this sucker and I'll go and kind of grab just what I need for the trip. In this case, I brought my Apple Pencil that goes with my iPad. I've got this Anker charging cube. This is one of their GaN Prime chargers. I have no idea what GaN is. I think it's gallium nitride or some sort of chemistry thing. The punchline of these is they're way smaller than your average power brick. So this guy has 2 USB-C and 1 regular USB ports on it, and it'll charge my MacBook, it'll charge an iPad Pro, it'll charge all the modern Android phones, and it kind of delivers them the maximum possible juice so you can charge them up. And the other thing I like about is the prongs will sort of pop out and then tuck in. So it's pretty easy shape to store somewhere since it's that solid rectangle. It doesn't have a lot of stuff sticking out on it. So this is maybe something that's excessive if you don't travel a ton, because I think these are 50, 60 bucks, but they do go on sale pretty regularly. But if you're traveling a lot, carrying around this thing that replaces a big brick charger for your laptop and maybe a couple of those little USB chargers is a pretty nice thing to have. Next up, and this is something I'll bring maybe 50, 60% of the time. This I think is also made by Anker, and it's a battery pack. What I like about this is a couple things. It has a little button, and I don't know if you can see that, but it'll show how much juice it has left versus, typically these things will have the 4 lights on top, and invariably they'll show you that you have 3 lights left until they suddenly go to 0. The percentage, I guess, is a little more accurate. And I also like that this little carrying strap is actually a USB-C cable that comes out. So you don't have to worry about having a separate cable or kind of having that hanging around. You've got this guy ready to go. And now pretty much all of my devices, except for a pretty limited subset, are charged via USB-C. So this guy will charge my phone, it'll charge my iPad. I guess in a pinch, it could put some juice into my MacBook if I needed it to. And it'll charge my phone, I think a couple or 3 times. It'll charge my iPad maybe once. So if I'm going on a trip where I'm gonna be away from power for a while, sometimes I'll be out doing a lot of client site visits. So we're moving around in a taxi or rental car, we're going site to site, we're talking to a whole bunch of people, and maybe doing a whole bunch of stuff with the phone, like sharing wireless connections or something like that, using my phone as a hotspot. And around 3 or 4, my phone's starting to die. This guy will kind of get me through a couple days. So I was worried I might run into that on this trip, or I might have a rental car that didn't have a working power port. So that's why I threw this in for this particular trip. Next up, I have this guy who I recently got from a company called StarTech. This is sort of a USB/USB-C travel docking station, and it will let you run 2 monitors. There's a Mac version and I think there's a PC version. Usually that stuff's interchangeable, but for some reason on the newer MacBooks, Apple has dorked them up somehow so they don't quite work with external monitors as well as the older MacBooks did. But this guy will let me connect to dual monitors with my MacBook. It'll also let me power a single monitor or TV with my iPad. And that's something that can come in useful in the obvious work scenarios where I might be presenting and need to go on an external screen. But also occasionally I'll hook up my iPad to a hotel TV. Most of them have HDMI cables these days, and I can watch a movie on the big screen or something if I'm bored or don't want to go out at night or just need a little downtime or something like that. Also has some standard USB connections. So for something like the MacBook or the iPad where you don't have regular USB and need to read a flash drive or access some external peripheral that's not USB-C, that'll help you work with that. So not a bad accessory for those scenarios. And this is one of those things like the external battery pack I may or may not bring depending on what I'm anticipating having happen on that particular trip. And that's kind of all for the gadgets. The only other thing I have in here is some cables. And typically I'll bring 2 USB-C cables. Again, everything I have pretty much is chargeable via USB-C these days. The big exception that I always travel with, because it's generally attached to me, is my Garmin watch. That needs a separate charger. But the good news is this watch will run for, even if I'm doing an hour or so of running every day, it'll last 7, maybe 9 days in a pinch. So I generally don't need to bring the charger with me unless I'm going on a multi-week trip. So I've got 2 USB-C cables. These will cover charging my laptop and/or tablet and phone and AirPods. And I've got these, I've printed up a bunch of these little 3D printed cable holders. I'll link to those if I can remember where I got them from. But if you have a 3D printer, I print a couple dozen of these things in various sizes and use them to sort of clip cables together and keep them organized as I go. And the only other cable I have is this generic regular USB, since I do have a regular USB plug on my charger, that has a USB-C, Apple Lightning, and mini or micro USB adapter on the end, whichever one is kind of the thin one that a lot of devices still tend to use. So this is something I'll usually bring with me just in case I'm with a colleague that has the older iPhone and needs a charge, or I still have some micro USB devices that I need to charge along the way that I'll talk about in a few minutes. So that's kind of my, cables connection. Again, it all fits in here. So if I, roll into an office or a hotel and need a quick charge, I can pull one thing out of my bag, grab the cables I need, file this guy back. If I'm sitting at a client site or, an office for a few hours, I can pop this guy on the table and kind of pull things out of there as I need. And it's, got some nice little memory card holsters and things like that that I'll use depending on what I'm doing on that particular trip. Other things I have in this outside pocket, let's see. Got my truck keys in here. I have this little magnetic thing that came with a bag that attaches there. So I will generally park at the airport at my home. I kind of clip this dude on, stash them in there. And then I always know where my keys are when I get home versus, sticking them in God knows where and either losing them or not being able to figure out where they are when I get back to the airport. I also will typically stash my AirPods in here. You might be starting to think that I'm an Apple fanboy based on all the Apple stuff that you're going to see and have seen so far. I'm kind of a reluctant Apple user. I like that all their stuff works together. I like that they've finally gotten with 2022 and adopted USB-C as their standard across devices. But whatever you use what you want. I don't think Apple is wildly superior to any of the Windows stuff. But if you can, try and get stuff that all charges using USB-C. Now, the remainder of the tech stuff that I have, and this is partially trip dependent, is I usually will carry either an iPad or a MacBook, and rarely will I carry both. On this trip, I brought my iPad. It's got the Apple keyboard, and I mostly really like this setup. I'm like 85-15. What I like is this is like the ultimate super lightweight laptop. I think it probably weighs just shy of 3 pounds with the keyboard. The keyboard I think is a bit overbuilt. It's metal now, it has a trackpad, and it's super nice to type on, but maybe a little heavier than it needs to be. And I miss the older Apple keyboards where it was kind of a folio where you could flip the monitor around. Now, if I want to sit on the airplane and watch a movie or read, I've got to pull this thing out, and then I've got this thing which, frankly, weighs the same or a little more than the iPad, and I've got to figure out, where do I put this, where do I stash it? But what I like is now with the Microsoft software, with mainly Microsoft Office and OneDrive and all that stuff, and my company happens to be a heavy Microsoft user, I can do 96-ish% of what I need to do for work on the iPad. And in my case, that's usually reading emails, reviewing documents, writing Word stuff, looking at spreadsheets and updating them, a lot of looking at PowerPoint and updating it. And it's not totally perfect, and you've got to wrap your brain around all the weirdness around files and how you store them in OneDrive and how it's not quite a file system like a normal computer. But it works well enough. And by virtue of bringing this iPad, I get all of the things that I like about a tablet, which is, watching movies, playing an occasional game, reading the news, things like that, and all the benefits of being able to do my work through the Microsoft Office suite. So generally, unless I have a really good reason, my default device I travel with is the iPad. And this is what I'll rock on like a 2-week personal vacation where I'm not going to have to do anything heavy duty. This is generally what I'll bring on a 1 to 4 day business trip if I'm not going to be doing anything heavy duty. Probably the main exception that would drive me to bring my MacBook is if I'm going to try and edit video on the road. There's not a good video editing solution that I've found for the iPad, which kind of stinks because the newer ones have Apple's fancy processor and have all this horsepower that I'm basically wasting by doing PowerPoint stuff. but until somebody makes good video editing software, that's sort of where I'm stuck. To the extent you can, think about the computing device that you bring. If you have to bring a work computer and it's really a giant beast, think about, do I want to bring a tablet with it, or is that a little bit excessive? What am I trying to do other than do my work on my work computer? If it's just read a couple books, maybe something like a Kindle or an old-fashioned paperback is just as good for you. But I always feel a little bad when I see these people that have a bag with like 2 heavy-duty laptops and a big tablet. And if your travel philosophy is have the best tech available to you when you travel, good for you. That's your philosophy. That's the way you should rock. But if it's just you're kind of bringing that stuff without having thought through it, spend a little time and think through it, because these are pretty heavy bits of your luggage. So let's get into the actual pack, and I'll hopefully spare you of anything particularly strange in here. I don't think I've got anything other than some dirty and potentially stinky running clothes. And I'll kind of give you some of the highlights here. Obviously, you're probably not interested in what kind of drawers I wear. If you are, that's a little bit creepy. And please do not hit that like and subscribe button. So I'm just going to hit some highlights here. So some of the highlights, and where I talked about weight optimization, I've got this Eagle Creek like ultralight nylon toilet bag. And I try and go through my toiletries every 6-ish months or so and make sure I don't have any weird junk in there. I like to accumulate some of the hotel stuff if it's really nice, and I'll throw that in here. And after 6 months, I'll look and be like, I don't need to travel with 6 things of moisturizer, or I might have, some cold medicine or something that's 10 years expired, and I'll get rid of that. But I would contrast this with, what I used to have, which was one of those, super fancy, I think it was either Toomey or Briggs & Riley, ballistic nylon toilet bags that were, look really cool. They're big, they're beefy, they're chunky. You can put 4 of these inside of them, but they take up a ton of room in your bag. They're excessively heavy. This thing weighs less than an ounce and it does the same job. I have a friend who's even more into the lightweight stuff than I am. He just carries a big old Ziploc bag and puts his couple or 3 toiletries in there. That's an option as well. This, at least, I like that you can hang it up somewhere occasionally. I use that a lot in our RV where I have a clothes hook next to the sink. Occasionally, if you have a hotel with a really small counter space, it's nice to be able to hang this thing on a wall and kind of leave it half open and pull out what you need for your toiletries. And I won't go into too much depth on the toiletry front. That's kind of a thing where you do you. But I would recommend doing that process of cleaning out your toiletry bag on a regular basis, making sure you're not carrying around a whole bunch of junk that you don't use or that's outlived its useful life. Other things I have in here, I mentioned that micro USB charger. I did bring my headlamp on this trip because I went running in the morning and the sun didn't come up till 8-ish, and I'd like to avoid being run over by a large vehicle. So, this is both a headlamp and it has a little blinky red light on the back. And I'll wear that if I'm going to go out for a run and it's, kind of a low visibility situation. The other thing I have in here that might be worth talking about is I got this, it's essentially just a big old sack. And I think somebody gave me like a Patagonia sweater at some point, and this was their gift wrap option. And they get a little deep into the recycling and the green stuff and all that. And they, hyped up that, hey, we're going to send you a bag with sort of leftover materials as the gift wrap. And I thought, that's a little bit goofy, but what it is a really nice laundry bag. And increasingly, hotels, as part of their greenwashing efforts, aren't giving you the old plastic bags. And I do have one in here since the hotel I was at did have the old plastic bags. And I'll usually use these for running clothes since they tend to be a little damp and a little bit excessively stinky. But if your hotel doesn't provide you with the plastic bags because they've decided that that's part of their greenwashing efforts, you can either grab a trash bag from somewhere that hasn't been used yet in your hotel. Usually there's a couple trash bags, one by the desk area, one in the bathroom. Or having something like this where it's a reusable bag is pretty nice. And you could probably take an old pillowcase, you could grab some sort of excess material if you're handy and sew something like this. But I do like to have some kind of laundry bag, so I keep my stinky and used clothes separate from my new clothes that I've yet to wear. Now, in terms of clothes, and I'm not gonna walk you through all my garments in here, but part of my lightweight philosophy is, are there areas where I can reuse clothing, where I'm not going to look like a schlub and I'm not going to smell funky? So typically, if I'm flying out to a site and I don't have any meetings that day, I usually typically fly out the afternoon before a meeting so I can get there on time, get settled in, not have to worry about rushing around, and not have to get up at the crack of dawn. I would wear something like this, some sort of generic button down or a t-shirt or something. And I'd probably wear the same outfit on the flight home. And in fact, that's what I did on this trip. No one sees me coming into the airport that I'm going to work with. No one saw me at 4 in the morning when I had to leave to go and catch my flight. So, why not just wear the same thing and save yourself an outfit change? Particularly since, I got home early in the morning, I'm going to go out for a run, take a shower, and change into something else. So, it's not a big deal. So think about those opportunities where you can kind of recycle or reuse clothing. Maybe you can mix and match stuff on a longer trip, so you're not bringing 15 pairs of shoes and 7 outfit changes for a 6-day trip or something like that. The final thing I'll show you on the clothing front, and you can buy these commercially. I made one, although if you're a real sewing person, seamster, if you're a real person that actually knows how to sew, you'll probably find this pretty poorly done, and it's already falling apart a little bit. But I made this little shoe bag for my running shoes, and typically you pick up a little dirt along the way. You don't want that rattling around in your bag. This is like a lightweight ripstop nylon material, so it gets a little bit of breathability, but will keep any dampness that you pick up if you're from sweat or from running in the rain or whatnot from getting all over your stuff. And it's just kind of a nice way to store your shoes in there. And if you've watched any of my videos, there's a whole bunch on running. I've waxed poetic about how running changed my life. I won't belabor that point here, but I do always try and include running on my business trips, both to help stay in shape and because it's also kind of a neat way to see whatever area I'm visiting, and you get to explore and play tourist a little bit, even if that tourism scenario is, my scenario yesterday where I was running near a gigantic strip mall complex and it was freezing. And on one hand, it wasn't the most pleasant run I've ever had. On the other hand, I don't get to run in the snow that often. It was nice and peaceful, and I was getting to see a little bit of a place that I wouldn't normally go. Now, other things I might bring sometimes that I didn't bring on this particular trip, I'll usually have a very lightweight windbreaker in here. Patagonia makes a great one. I forget what it's called, but I'll put it in the links down below. Outdoor Research makes something similar. You can kind of see this theme where I'm going to the ultralight backpacking space to find something. But to the extent you can get a really nice lightweight windbreaker type thing that you can throw in, those can be really versatile. You can wear them on the plane if it's a little chilly. You can wear them in a light rain if it's a little damp wherever you are. You can wear them as a layer if you're already bringing a coat or something like that. You can do something similar with a hoodie or a sweater or something like that. But having some sort of extra, hey, it's a little colder than I thought it might be type of layer in there is a pretty good idea as well. So this is a pretty typical loadout for me. I would say all this stuff will come with me on pretty much any trip, with the exception of maybe changing out the iPad for the MacBook, or in rare cases, bringing both of those. And the only other thing that'll change is I might add incremental days of clothing if I'm going for a longer trip. And I'll do the one bag thing up to like probably 6-7 days is about the longest I can get by. And I'll need a bigger bag than this one. And in that case, I might throw in, I have some ultralight little collapsible backpacks that kind of fold into a thing about the size of your fist. So when I get to where I am, I'm not carrying around this giant turtle shell type bag. I'll take out a little collapsible backpack, throw my iPad or laptop in there, throw this little electronics bag in there, and that's what I'll bring to and from the office, and not look like I'm bringing my entire home with me on my back, which can get a little excessive. So hopefully this was helpful to you. I'm now going to go in and obviously put all the dirty stuff in the laundry, completely unpack this bag, put everything back in its place. I've got to go on another similar trip next week, and despite the fact that it's, I think, one night in that case and one day of meetings, I'm going to go through that process that I go through on every trip of what's the weather, what kind of clothes do I need, what running setup am I going to bring, and then what kind of gadgets do I need, what cables. Probably end up bringing the iPad again in that case, and do that process just so I ensure that I only have what I need. I'm kind of equipped for the mission at hand, and I'm not bringing a whole bunch of extra cruff that's going to make life more difficult. So as I said in the beginning, develop your own philosophy. If you see something here that resonates and makes a lot of sense to you, adopt it, modify it. If you see something that you think, wow, that guy is really a bozo and that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard, don't run out and buy this stuff if it's not going to work for you. If the thing that makes you secure and happy and healthy and have a better experience when you're traveling is, a gigantic rolling suitcase that you check with 4 of those huge toiletry bags and 17 pairs of shoes for a 4-day trip, you do you. I would maybe advocate just a little bit to try something closer to this philosophy and see how it works for you. And if you hate it, abandon it. I'd also encourage you, again, don't run out and buy all new stuff. If you want to try this one bag thing, if you want to try this more minimalist approach to packing, use the stuff you already got. I'm sure you have a work backpack somewhere, or you have some kind of bag you got at a conference. I'm sure you have a big Ziploc bag that you can put your toiletries in instead of some giant toiletry case before you go out and spend 20 or 30 bucks on this thing. Maybe you don't have the super fancy charger just yet, but instead of bringing 7 cables for every possible eventuality, bring one charger for your laptop and one of those little USB cubes and like 2 cables and see how that works out for you. And if suddenly you find yourself liberated and experiencing travel in a whole new dimension, then get all kind of the cool optimized type stuff. If you have any travel tips you've learned, I'm always learning at this stuff, throw them down in the comments. And regardless of your travel philosophy, regardless of how you roll, I wish you the best in travel. I hope that you end up in wonderful, fantastic places with a smile on your face and on-time departures across the board. Big Heavy, wishing you well. Peace.